Chloe's name appeared on his tablet 19 times. 19. Every notification was a frantic alert as a sudden, terrifying complication put their unborn son at risk. He saw each alert pop up. He read every desperate message. Then, with a casual swipe, he activated Do Not Disturb mode, pulled the woman in his arms closer, and fell back asleep. The last clear thought she formed before the agony consumed her was, Marcus. But Marcus was preoccupied. What followed, however, is a story of incredible fortitude. The betrayed wife he abandoned to face her ordeal alone was no fragile heiress. She was a renowned art historian, and her father was one of the most powerful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. So when the true depth of his deception was revealed, she didn't collapse. She started collecting evidence. This is the story of how a mother's ferocious protective instinct, forged in the fires of a profound betrayal, dismantled a corrupt tech empire from the inside, and you will be gripped by every single detail. So listen closely. This journey reveals a critical truth. Deception can shatter your life, but it does not have to define your future. Chloe lost her baby, her husband, and very nearly her own freedom. Yet she refused to be characterized as a victim. She transformed her grief into a meticulous strategy, her pain into purpose, and her catastrophic loss into a foundation that would later empower thousands of other women. The lesson is simple, but profound. Your circumstances never get the final word on your resilience. It is only when you have absolutely nothing left to lose that you discover the true measure of your strength. Real justice is not about revenge. It's about permanently neutralizing those who cause harm. Several months before her final victory, a biting wind rolled off the San Francisco Bay and across the grounds of the Columbarium. It sliced through the dark cashmere coats of the attendees, a chill that felt bone deep. Standing slightly away from the small gathering was Chloe Sterling. Her face was a perfectly sculpted mask of grief, her posture as unyielding as the marble monuments around her. She wore a simple, shockingly expensive black dress, her dark hair pulled back in a severe chignon. To any onlooker, she was the picture of dignified sorrow, but just beneath that composed exterior, an emotion far more dangerous and powerful than sadness was simmering. The celebrant's voice was a low hum in the background. He talked about empty ideas like everlasting peace and a better place. Chloe had abandoned such notions 3 months ago, on the night she lost her child. It was the same night her husband ignored her desperate pleas in favor of his mistress. Now, standing at the memorial service she had arranged herself, Chloe felt the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. It was not a smile of joy, but of cold, hard success, a plan perfectly executed. She remembered the words she had repeated to herself in the silent darkness of her home. People say grief drives you to extremes, but grief wasn't what fueled me. Betrayal was. And the people who ruined my future learned a very costly lesson. My father never forgets, and neither do I. As the service ended, her eyes scanned the crowd, looking for 2 people she knew would not be there. They were miles away, dressed in government-issued jumpsuits. Marcus Thorne was handed a 15-year sentence. Ava Chen received 47. But to understand how Chloe went from a devastated expectant mother to an agent of calculated retribution, we have to go back to the start. We return to a morning that started like any other, in a life that seemed flawless from the outside but was decaying from within. 3 months prior, the day broke gray and foggy. Chloe moved about her enormous Pacific Heights kitchen. A profound weariness settled deep within her, but she ignored it. Her entire being focused on her pregnancy. She sat at the quartz island, a sophisticated fetal heart monitor wrapped carefully around her pregnant belly, its quiet, steady rhythm a source of constant reassurance. It was a stable pulse, a tiny, precious life developing inside of her. She set a bowl of organic berries and Greek yogurt before her, attempting to force a genuine smile to hide her rising fear. "Time for breakfast, little guy," she murmured to her belly. At that moment, the sound of confident, heavy footsteps descended the floating glass staircase. Marcus Thorne entered the kitchen with the supreme confidence of a man who thought he ran the world. His attire was deceptively simple, a designer hoodie, rare sneakers, but his watch alone was worth more than their entire 9 months of prenatal care. He was also wearing a cologne Chloe didn't recognize. He didn't glance at her belly. He barely even looked at her. His focus was entirely on his phone. She watched him, seeing the slight angle of his body turned away from her, the ghost of a smirk on his face as he typed. "Our appointment with the specialist is at 2 o'clock, Chloe said softly. "Are you going to be there?" Marcus answered without looking up. "I'm closing our Series B funding round today. I can't just cancel everything for a simple checkup." "It's not just a simple checkup, Marcus. The doctor has some concerns. I really need you there." That finally got him to lift his head, his expression cold and distant. "Someone has to pay for this lifestyle, Chloe," he shot back. "Or had you forgotten you haven't earned a dime in nearly 4 years? The insult struck home, a sharp, familiar pain, but she wouldn't grant him the satisfaction of a reaction. She had put a brilliant career as an art curator on hold to create a family with him. She had given up industry recognition and major exhibitions, and now he used that sacrifice as a weapon against her. Marcus grabbed his sleek leather backpack. He didn't offer a kiss or a touch to her stomach. He didn't even look back at the woman carrying his son. "Marcus," Chloe said, as his hand reached the door. He sighed, the sound heavy with annoyance. "What now?" "Please, just try to make it. They said there might be some good news." For a split second, a flicker of something human crossed his face, but it was gone as fast as it had appeared. "We'll see," he said, his tone dismissive. "I'm an incredibly busy man." And just like that, he was gone. The heavy front door clicked shut, leaving a vast, echoing silence behind. She slid the bowl of berries away, her appetite vanishing. She put a hand on her belly, a silent question forming in her thoughts. Why doesn't he care about us? The idea was like a shard of glass in her heart. She hugged herself, a gesture of self-protection. "Of course he loves us," she whispered to her baby, a desperate lie. "He's just under so much pressure with the company. He loves you more than anything." The words felt like poison in her mouth. But how could she possibly admit to herself, much less her unborn baby, that its own father considered them an inconvenience, a disruption to his perfectly engineered life? She felt a soft flutter from inside, a trusting, innocent kick. "I love you," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I love you so very, very much. More than anything else in this whole world." She had no idea that she had less than 12 hours before that world would be completely destroyed. Later, in the cold, impersonal setting of the specialist's clinic, she sat by herself. The waiting room furniture was uncomfortable, the art on the walls painfully generic. She had been waiting for almost an hour, and the seat next to her was still painfully empty. A nurse gave her a sympathetic look as she walked by. She had seen Chloe at every single appointment, and she was always on her own. "CEO husband tied up in meetings?" the nurse asked, her voice a mix of pity and judgment. Chloe produced a weak smile. "Yes, he's incredibly dedicated." The nurse's nod said it all. Her face told a story she had seen countless times before. At that moment, Chloe's phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Investor dinner. Don't wait up." She stared at the message on her phone. Another investor dinner. She had lost count of the constant late nights, the times he had come home in the pre-dawn hours, smelling of a strange perfume, armed with a perfectly plausible excuse. For months, a feeling of deep suspicion had been growing inside her. But suspicion and proof were two very different things, and a part of her was terrified of confirming the truth. She put her phone on silent and placed her hands on her belly. She would deal with Marcus later. Right now, the only thing that was important was the tiny life she was protecting. Dr. Evans, a kind man with gray hair, looked at Chloe with serious concern. He explained her blood pressure was at a dangerous level, and the pregnancy was under extreme duress. The doctor's orders were clear and absolute. If she felt any intense cramping or lightheadedness, she was to call 911 immediately. She was not to drive herself to the hospital or wait for the symptoms to subside. A wave of cold fear washed over Chloe, as she promised she would. The doctor then spoke to her softly, reminding her to remain as calm and stress-free as she possibly could for the baby's health. Chloe swore she would do her best. With that, the doctor booked an urgent follow-up appointment and stressed that she needed to monitor her health constantly. Chloe left the clinic and walked into the biting December air. Her phone buzzed one more time. It was another message from Marcus, saying the dinner was going long and he would be home well after midnight. She deleted the text without replying. That night, Chloe took a warm bath, attempting to release the tension that was tightening around her like a vice. A deep, unspoken fear told her that her time was running out. She moved with slow, deliberate care, murmuring to her baby as she got ready for a quiet evening alone. She got into bed with a novel about a powerful queen who conquered every challenge thrown her way, no matter how impossible it seemed. She saw the words on the page, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. A thought, as sharp as a knife, cut through her anxiety. Are we going to be okay? She put a hand over her heart, making a silent vow to the life growing inside her. We're tough, you and I, she murmured to the baby nestled safely in her womb. And tough people always figure things out. She shut her eyes, willing the universe to make it true. For a time, she just lay there, concentrating on the soft rise and fall of her own chest, trying to ground herself in the here and now. Later that night, desperate to reach her husband during a sudden medical emergency, she called his phone again and again with no success. In a surge of panic, she grabbed their shared laptop, thinking she could use their rideshare account to pinpoint his location. As the screen blinked on, his recent trips were displayed. Her gaze fell on a ride that ended an hour ago at the St. Regis Hotel, and an email notification on the screen from their shared calendar. The event, created by a woman named Juliet, read, "Don't be late. I can't wait." She couldn't absorb the implosion of her marriage while fighting for her baby's survival. I'll think about it later, she swore to herself. But her life was about to veer onto a path she never imagined. At 11:23 p.m., a brutal, paralyzing pain ripped through her abdomen, waking her from a restless sleep. It was an agony so intense it stole her breath. She stumbled down the hallway, a trail of blood on the floorboards, her body racked with violent tremors. A terrifying warmth was spreading too fast. The preeclampsia monitor she used twice daily began to shriek, its high-pitched wail cutting through the silence of their San Francisco brownstone. She collapsed, feeling a horrifying loss of control as her hands shook too badly to dial her phone to call Marcus. The call went straight to voicemail. She disconnected and dialed again. Voicemail. She managed a clumsy text. Something is wrong with the baby. UCSF Medical Center. Come now. The delivery confirmation showed it was read at 10:47 p.m. Silence. With no more time for the icy fear creeping up her spine, she dialed 911. She held her swollen belly, rocking and whispering, "Hold on, little one. Mommy is right here. An ambulance is on its way." The baby gave a faint, fluttering kick, Her mind screamed a word she couldn't say out loud. "Daddy. He'll be there, sweetie." Eleanor lied, her voice breaking on a sob. But he wouldn't be there. 30 blocks away, in a penthouse overlooking the bay, tech CEO Marcus Thorne was with Juliet Croft. She was everything Eleanor was not, a ruthless venture capitalist, intensely driven, and unencumbered by the impending chaos of a newborn. Marcus's phone buzzed relentlessly on the granite bar top. Juliet glanced at the glowing screen. "It's Eleanor again," she said, sliding the phone in his direction. "Looks like she's blowing you up." Marcus barely looked away from his glass of whiskey. He waved a dismissive hand, explaining that Eleanor's anxiety had been in overdrive for months. And she panicked over every little twinge. He silenced the ringer and turned the phone over. If it was a real emergency, he reasoned, her doctor would be calling me. He claimed he was in the final stages of a critical merger. Juliet shrugged, leaning back against his chest. "You're right," she whispered. "She's probably just overreacting." Marcus smiled and drew her closer, completely unaware of the life and death crisis unfolding just across the city. In that very moment, an unborn child was fighting for life. The ambulance ride felt like an eternity. Paramedics swarmed around her, starting an IV and shouting about her blood pressure. At the hospital, a trauma team was waiting, yelling medical jargon as they rushed her toward an operating room. Eleanor refused to let go of the paramedic's hand, begging, "That's my baby, please don't let her go." A kind nurse took her place, assuring her they would do everything in their power. Eleanor felt utterly paralyzed, watching the blur of scrubs and machines through the porthole window of the OR door. She tried Marcus one last, futile time, leaving a frantic, sobbing voicemail. At 11:51 p.m., the rhythmic whoosh of the fetal heart monitor was replaced by a single piercing tone. It was a sound that shattered Eleanor's universe. A surgeon in blue scrubs emerged, her face a mask of profound sorrow. She didn't have to say a word. Eleanor already knew. "Mrs. Thorne," she began, her voice gentle, "I am so terribly sorry." The world around her dissolved. We did everything we could, but there was a massive placental abruption. Eleanor's legs buckled, and she slid down the cold, sterile wall to the floor. A raw animal sound of pain was torn from her throat, a cry of pure loss that echoed down the silent hospital wing. Her perfect daughter, her precious Olivia, was gone. Hours later, in the stark quiet of the hospital chapel at 2 in the morning, she clutched a tiny pink hat the nurse had given her, trying to imagine the scent of the child she never got to hold. The tears were gone, leaving only a vast, empty cavern where her heart had been. Her phone vibrated with an email notification. It was from the rideshare service, an account Marcus had set up for them both years ago. The subject line read, "Your trip receipt from last night." She tapped it open. It was a detailed summary of a ride for Marcus Thorne, showing a drop-off at the St. Regis Hotel at 10:58 p.m., the charge for waiting time, and a final trip end time of 6 a.m. the following morning. The bottom of the email concluded with, "Hope you had a great night." Eleanor stared at the screen until the words blurred, and a strange, hollow laugh escaped her lips. It was the sound of a woman who had just lost her future, only to discover it had been stolen from her. It was the sound of grief, crystallizing into something cold and sharp. Her daughter died while her father was with his mistress, ignoring the calls that begged him to come to the hospital. The laughter died. All feeling vanished. A precise, methodical iciness rushed into the void, and in that iciness, a strategy began to form. She held the tiny hat to her cheek for a final moment. Then she carefully tucked it into her purse and got to her feet. She would be waiting when Marcus finally deigned to come home. Marcus Thorne walked into their apartment at 6 a.m. smelling of another woman's perfume, poorly masked by expensive cologne, his alibi perfectly rehearsed. He froze when he saw Eleanor sitting in the dimly lit living room, perfectly still. She was in the armchair by the window, the tiny pink hat resting in her lap. The laptop on the ottoman was open, displaying the ride-share receipt from the night before. Marcus launched into his well-oiled lie. "Ellie, my God, I'm so sorry. We had a catastrophic server failure at the data center. I've been there all night. By the time I saw your messages, I figured you were home and resting." Eleanor just stared at him, her silence sucking the air out of the room. Marcus shifted, unnerved. He was expecting hysterics, accusations that he was an absent husband. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his tone now tinged with real confusion. "Did you go to the doctor?" Eleanor finally spoke, her voice level and completely empty of emotion. "Olivia died at 11:51 last night." Marcus's confident facade disintegrated into pure shock. "What?" he stammered. "I had a placental abruption. I called you 22 times. The timestamps on your app usage show you were active on your phone." Marcus scrambled for a defense. "Ellie, my phone was on silent. I was in a secure facility. I didn't get them until it was over. And I thought you were just having cramps. You always said my worries were just first-time mom nerves." Eleanor nodded toward the laptop. "The St. Regis, penthouse suite, billed for last night. $2,400 on our joint credit card." Marcus's composure shattered. He weighed his options and decided to double down. "The board booked it. For the investors from Singapore, the server crash meant we had to work there. It's not what you think." Eleanor finally lifted her eyes to meet his. "With Juliet Croft? Your calendar said, 'Don't be late'?" The silence was deafening. Marcus's expression flashed from guilt to panic, before hardening into aggressive self-defense. "You're in shock," he said, his voice becoming condescending. "You've just lost our child, and you're looking for someone to blame. I get it. We'll discuss this later, when you're thinking more clearly." Eleanor stood up. She seemed to have grown taller, her posture iron straight, no longer bent by the physical toll of her pregnancy. "Her cardiologist said my stress levels were a major risk factor," she stated, her voice dangerously low. "I was terrified, and I was bleeding to death. She needed you, and you were with her." Marcus took a step back, seeing a frigid resolve in her eyes that was entirely new. "Eleanor, you're not being rational. Grief is making you invent conspiracies. Let me call Dr. Miller. We will get through this tragedy together." "Get out," she said, her gaze fixed on a point just past his shoulder. He attempted to regain control. "This is my home. I'm not going anywhere. You're having a psychotic break, and you need medical attention." Eleanor advanced on him, her stare like chips of ice. "Before I quit my job to manage your public image, I was an investigative journalist specializing in tech malfeasance. I know how to read source code and follow a data trail. I know about your backdoor data sharing agreements. I know about the algorithm you stole. I know which regulators at the SEC would be fascinated to learn about the friends and family stock options you issued right before that last funding round was announced. So when I say get out, it is not a suggestion. You have 5 minutes before I start emailing my sources at the Wall Street Journal." For the first time in their marriage, Marcus Thorne looked truly terrified of his wife. He grabbed his briefcase and left without another word. Eleanor watched the door close, then sank to her knees and clutched the tiny pink hat. She gave herself precisely 1 hour to shatter completely, to scream and weep into the soft fabric. When the hour was up, she wiped her eyes, got to her feet, and picked up her phone. She found a contact she hadn't used in 5 years, someone Marcus had insisted was a bad influence and forced her to cut ties with. "He's just trying to control you, Isabel," Damien's smooth voice echoed in her memory. "You have to pick a side." She had picked the wrong one, and now she knew it. With a trembling finger, she dialed. Her father answered before the second ring, his voice a familiar anchor. "Isabel." "Dad," she choked out, the word shattering. "Olivia's gone, and he lied about everything." A beat of silence stretched across the line before his voice came back, stripped of all warmth and replaced with the cold, steely calm she knew so well. "I'll be on the first flight." Retired federal judge Harrison Cole landed in San Francisco 12 hours later. When Isabel opened the door to her penthouse, she saw that the years had carved deeper lines into his stern face. But his eyes were the same, sharp, analytical, missing nothing. He took in the devastation in his daughter's hollowed-out expression and pulled her into an embrace. Against his chest, Isabel's composure finally broke, and she wept with an abandon she hadn't allowed herself until now. In the safety of his arms, the damn wall crumbled. "I shut you out," she sobbed. "I actually believed him when he said, 'You wanted to run my life.' I chose him over you, and now my baby is gone, and I have nothing." Harrison held her firmly. "He systematically cut you off from everyone. Watching it happen was agonizing, but that part is over." He gently cupped her face in his hands, a gesture from a long-ago childhood. "Show me," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Show me what he did." Wordlessly, she led him to her laptop. She played the video her phone had automatically backed up to their cloud. It showed Damien, with another woman, laughing as he silenced the incoming call, her name glowing on the screen. When it was over, Harrison stared at the blank screen, his jaw set like granite. It was a look Isabel knew, a judge considering the full weight of a sentence. "What is it you want, Isabel?" he asked. The raw grief had crystallized into something cold and hard. "I want to dismantle his entire world," she replied, her voice devoid of tears. "His company, his name, his future. I want him to know what it feels like to have absolutely nothing." Harrison gave one sharp, decisive nod. "Then we proceed as I would in court, methodically, without emotion, without error. We will gather evidence and build a case so irrefutable that there will be no escape. When we are through, Damien Sterling will be a ghost." He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had decided fates for a living. For the first time in a week, Isabel felt a flicker of something besides despair. "Where do we start?" she asked. Harrison picked up his phone. "We start with a weapon. We need leverage," Harrison stated. "You mentioned Damien has side deals, investments you know nothing about. We need someone who can navigate that world." Isabel shook her head, but Harrison was already thinking. "Nina Sharma. She was my best law clerk. Now she's the most feared cybersecurity litigator in Silicon Valley." Isabel looked at him. "Someone from your past? You've talked about her before." A flicker of regret crossed Harrison's face. "I should have kept in better touch. The corporate world swallowed her whole, but she was brilliant." "Do you think she'll help?" Isabel asked. Harrison recalled Nina's fierce intellect, her intolerance for injustice. "She'll take the call. She always respected the law." "Then call her," Isabel urged. "I already have," Harrison said, ending the call. "She's meeting us tomorrow. She asked about his server infrastructure." "I only know what he's told me," Isabel confessed. "He mentioned an off-the-book server for his private equity partners." Nina's voice came through the speakerphone. "Then we'll need to gain access to his home office network and make a copy of everything." Her tone was cold and clinical. "My team can find anything." "Is that legal?" Isabel asked. Nina's reply was instant. "Legality is a matter of perspective." The next day, they met Nina in a sterile, glass-walled conference room. The professional respect between her and Harrison was palpable. But when Nina looked at Isabel, her sharp demeanor cracked for a moment, replaced by genuine sympathy. "Judge," she said quietly, then turned to Isabel. I was so sorry to hear about your daughter. After a moment of shared grief, the distance returned. They spoke over untouched cups of coffee. We need your help, Nina, Harrison said, getting straight to the point. Not just as a courtesy. We need the best. Your reputation is unmatched. Nina gave a slow nod. I can handle the digital forensics, Judge, but I get the feeling this is more than just a divorce case. Isabel pushed a tablet across the polished table. It showed a folder of financial documents. Over the past few years, Damien had me e-sign dozens of investment forms. He said it was for our portfolio. I trusted him, so I never looked closely. Nina's eyes scanned the documents, her expression hardening. This isn't a standard investment portfolio, Nina said flatly. These are founding documents for shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. Isabel, if your digital signature is on these, this goes far beyond infidelity. What are you saying? Isabel asked, her voice thin. I'm saying we need to know exactly what he had you sign. If these corporations were used for illegal purposes, your name makes you an accomplice. The blood drained from Isabel's face. So, he didn't just abandon me. He was setting me up to be his scapegoat. That's the working theory, Nina confirmed, her voice softening slightly. But here's the upside. If we can prove fraudulent inducement, that he deceived you into signing, we can flip this whole thing. He wears the crime, not you. And how do we do that? We build a timeline. Every document, every email, every conversation you recall. Harrison's eyes were like chips of ice. I can do that. My mind is clear. Isabel looked at her father. He told me you two barely spoke anymore. Harrison's jaw was tight. Estrangement becomes irrelevant when your grandchild dies because her father was entertaining a mistress instead of answering his wife's emergency calls. Suddenly, old disagreements seemed trivial. Nina looked at Harrison, her expression unreadable. Years ago, I advised you to be wary of the tech world's ethics, Judge. I wasn't being cynical. I was worried men like him would one day intersect with your life. You were right, Harrison said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't listen. No apologies, Nina replied. Just be ready for the fight, because I'll be with you every step of the way. For the first time since the hospital, Isabel felt the strength of a real alliance. Thank you, she said. Nina offered a rare, thin smile. Save your thanks for when we see him in a courtroom. The following weeks became a whirlwind of digital excavation, with Nina's team of ethical hackers working around the clock. In that time, Isabel transformed. The grief was still a constant hollow ache, but now it was forged into a sharp-edged purpose. She combed through her digital life, identifying every document Damien had rushed her to sign when she was preoccupied or tired. He had weaponized her absolute trust in him. Meanwhile, Nina's top operative cloned Damien's private server. Within 2 weeks, they had a complete mirror of his secret financial life. The reality was more sinister than they had imagined. A complex network of shell companies, anonymous crypto transactions, and hidden ledgers. Nina laid it all out for them on a secure video call. Tens of millions of dollars were flowing through entities bearing her digital signature, entities she had never even heard of. It confirmed their deepest fears. A sophisticated money laundering operation. The only question was whether Damien was the architect or merely a high-level facilitator. Harrison examined the transaction logs, his judicial mind seeing patterns everywhere. He saw incoming funds from sources far too powerful for Damien to control on his own. He's not the king, Harrison murmured. He's a bishop. Someone else is playing the game. Identifying the other players would have to wait. They had enough to burn the board. 3 weeks after losing her daughter, Isabel sat with her father in Nina's office. Nina had a digital folder containing ironclad proof of Damien's financial crimes and his affair, but the most chilling piece of evidence remained the video from that night. It showed Damien's location, his companion, and the moment Isabel's name appeared on his screen. Harrison watched again as the digital version of his son-in-law glanced at the phone and casually pressed the red icon to silence it. He then typed a quick message to the woman beside him and set the phone down. It was a conscious choice, Harrison said, his voice a low growl. He saw her name and chose to ignore it. Nina nodded. This alone will destroy him in civil court. Combined with the financial data, he's facing prison. Are you ready to proceed? Isabel looked at the evidence, a digital tombstone for her old life. She thought of her daughter's tiny, brief life and the countless nights she'd made excuses for Damien's late meetings. Do it, she said, her voice like ice. As Nina prepared to contact the authorities, Harrison's burner phone vibrated. It was a text from a blocked number. A cold dread settled in his stomach as he read the words. You should have left it alone, Judge. Attached was a photo of Isabel, taken through the window of Nina's office just moments ago. He showed the phone to Nina. Is that Damien? Isabel whispered. No, Harrison answered grimly. Damien is arrogant, but he's not this sophisticated. This is from his partners, the ones who know we're coming for them. Do we pause? Nina asked, her hand hovering over her mouse. Marcus considered his options, his posture straightening with resolve. No, we file in the morning, he announced. We press forward and expose who is truly pulling the strings. Nina gave him a sharp, appreciative nod. It's good to have you back, Judge, she said. The civil suit was filed on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Marcus's meticulously ordered life had imploded. 2 stone-faced agents from the Treasury Department were waiting at his study door. I am Agent Davies, the lead agent stated. We have some questions for you regarding an entity named Argent Capital Partners. A cold knot formed in Marcus's stomach. It was one of the offshore corporations from the documents. Your name is listed as the sole director, Agent Davies went on, his tone thick with suspicion. We have concerns about its transaction history. I have no knowledge of that company. My son-in-law advised me to sign those papers for estate planning, he clarified. That's a common refrain, the second agent said, with a dismissive smirk. They interrogated him for 3 grueling hours. When they were finished, Marcus felt utterly stripped bare. They possessed bank ledgers and international wire transfer records, all pointing to a sprawling money laundering scheme with his signature on every page. After they departed, the horrifying reality crashed down on him. Leo hadn't just been unfaithful to his daughter. He hadn't just abandoned her and his unborn child. He had spent years methodically constructing a legal cage. And Marcus was the one who had just walked into it. His phone chimed, an unregistered number. The text read, You should have listened. A second message arrived, this one containing a legal document. It was an emergency protective order Leo had filed against him. In it, he alleged Marcus was showing signs of cognitive decline and was a danger to his family. It included sworn declarations from colleagues Marcus had considered allies, all attesting to his recent erratic behavior. Then Nina called, Marcus, we're facing a 5-alarm fire. I'm aware. The Treasury Department just left. This is worse, Nina said, her voice strained with urgency. Leo preemptively filed a countersuit, and the allegations are monstrous. What allegations? He's claiming you mismanaged Isabel's prenatal care. He's telling the world that your overbearing presence and deteriorating mental state caused her so much stress, it triggered her pregnancy complications. He's framing himself as the devoted husband trying to protect her. That is an absolute fabrication, Marcus choked out. I postponed my retirement to support Isabel. I attended every single specialist visit. Leo was never there. I know that, Nina affirmed, but he's shaping the narrative. His mother is planting stories with gossip columnists, and the mud is sticking. He's trying to utterly discredit you before you can discredit him. How do we fight this? We use the truth as our weapon, Nina declared. The affair, the forged financial statements, the server logs showing he ignored her calls for hours. We need to prove you were deliberately misled, but that could drag on for months. In the interim, you could be indicted. Marcus felt the book-lined walls of his study begin to suffocate him. A month ago, his most pressing issue was his daughter's high-risk pregnancy and failing marriage. Now he was mourning a grandchild he'd never meet, and was the principal target in a federal fraud investigation. "Have you reached out to my son?" he asked. "He called me an hour ago," Nina replied. "He said to tell you to hold the line. He's already digging into something, but he was cagey about the details. I've known your son a long time." When Marcus Thorne wrote a legal opinion, he made sure the guilty party received precisely the sentence they had earned. "I hope so," Isabel whispered to the empty room. "I truly, truly hope so." The next 2 weeks were a waking nightmare. Familiar faces from the Chicago art scene would suddenly find something fascinating to look at across the room at gallery openings. On a popular city gossip blog, an anonymous commenter painted her as a greedy accomplice in her family's financial crimes. Isabel slammed her laptop shut, abandoning her search for a bassinet, refusing to give the trolls the satisfaction of her tears. Back in the quiet sanctuary of her gallery office, she sank into a leather chair, her fingers tracing the outline of a faded ultrasound photo. She cried until her head throbbed and her eyes were raw. She just sat there, enveloped by the silence, wondering if this was how it all ended. Not in a fiery confrontation, but in a slow, chilling fade into isolation. Her phone vibrated on the desk. A text from her father. "I'm on my way up." When he entered, he saw his daughter looking fragile and defeated. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply observed her with his familiar, discerning gaze. "You're making a fundamental error," he said, his voice steady. "You're mistaking the indictment for the verdict. Dad, Leo has the most ruthless litigation firm in Chicago on retainer. The government thinks I'm part of a conspiracy. I have nothing left to fight with." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense. "That's where you are mistaken. You have the truth. You have your integrity. And you have me. I did not preside over the federal court for 30 years, just to watch some two-bit con man with a fancy suit ruin my daughter. We are not going to engage him in his arena of frivolous motions and character assassination," Marcus told her. "We are going to move for a change of venue. And in our court, every single person who enabled his lies will be named as a material witness to his downfall. By the time we are done, Leo Vance will be radioactive. Then he will finally understand what it means to be truly bankrupt." The meeting was held in a private library at an old Chicago social club, a place of old money and quiet influence, paneled in dark walnut and smelling of leather and history. Marcus Thorne sat at a large oak table waiting. Seated opposite him were 3 figures in immaculate bespoke suits, the senior managing partners of Leo Vance's hedge fund, Apex Global. "Gentlemen, Madam Chair," Marcus started with a calm, polite smile, "I appreciate you making time for me. I know your schedules are demanding." The chairwoman, Genevieve Harding, offered a clipped nod. "Judge Thorne, your reputation speaks for itself. When you request a meeting, one assumes a verdict is about to be rendered. Tell us why we are here." "This isn't about the verdict I'm going to deliver, but rather the one you can help me write," Marcus said, sliding a thin, encrypted tablet across the table. I've uncovered some profound compliance failures within your fund, all stemming from the proprietary trading algorithm of your junior partner, Leo Vance. The three partners traded guarded looks. The youngest partner, a data whiz named Ben Carter, spoke up. What kind of failures? Marcus tapped the tablet, displaying a complex web of transactions and routing codes. Your primary emerging markets fund, the core of your 5-year growth strategy. It's been systematically used to wash money for an international syndicate. The activity is buried under layers of high-frequency trades, all executed by an algorithm only Mr. Vance has the credentials to operate. A heavy silence filled the room. I am quite sure, Marcus said evenly, that this discovery is as disturbing to you as it was to me. I know you would not want Apex Global's good name connected to international racketeering. Genevieve Harding, the chairwoman, finally found her voice, which was now like shattered glass. Why come to us? Why not go directly to the SEC? Marcus explained he wanted to give them the opportunity to manage the fallout. He pointed out that if this became a RICO case, the blowback wouldn't be contained to just Leo Vance. The headlines would be about the board's lack of oversight. Investor confidence tends to evaporate when the story is about gross negligence at the executive level. The implication was stark and unavoidable. Carter's face lost all color, and the third partner began fiddling with his tie. What is it that you want? Genevieve asked, her voice dangerously low. Marcus wanted one thing. He wanted Leo Vance's partnership dissolved, effective, immediately, and announced via press release. He wanted the fund to issue a statement acknowledging an internal investigation into financial misconduct by a rogue employee. And if we refuse, the third partner challenged, then this tablet, and the more comprehensive brief it contains, is hand-delivered to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, the Financial Times, and several influential financial journalists I count as friends. Marcus explained that the resulting scandal would burn everyone, but the managing partners of a multi-billion-dollar fund had the most to lose. Genevieve stared at him, then picked up the tablet and began to swipe through the data. Marcus waited calmly, taking a sip of water. He saw the recognition dawn on their faces as they looked at the undeniable proof of the scheme. At last, Genevieve lowered the tablet and looked at her partners. A silent agreement passed between them. We will need to independently verify this information, Genevieve said, her voice tight. Of course, Marcus replied, getting to his feet and buttoning his jacket. But I would recommend you proceed with all due haste. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. On a personal note, my daughter is pregnant with Leo's child. Her assets are frozen, and she is a person of interest in a federal investigation because Mr. Vance was compromised. So you must understand, my asking you to simply fire him is me showing immense judicial restraint. He closed the door behind him. 48 hours later, the head of compliance and 2 corporate lawyers were waiting for Leo Vance as he stepped out of the private elevator onto the trading floor. Mr. Vance, the compliance officer said without emotion, we need you to come with us. What is this about? Leo snapped, irritated. There are some concerns regarding your trading activity. The partners would like to speak with you. Leo strode behind them toward the main boardroom. He could feel the eyes of his traders on him, the sudden halt in conversation as he passed. Inside, the 3 managing partners were waiting, their faces like granite. Leo, have a seat, Genevieve said. What in the hell is going on? Leo demanded. We are placing you on immediate and indefinite administrative leave, pending a full investigation into a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty. Arthur's face flushed a deep, dangerous red. This is a complete fabrication. I have an explanation for every single trade. I'm sure you think you do, Eleanor replied, her voice like ice. But until you provide it, your access to all Sterling Capital buildings and network credentials is 100% revoked. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal items. You can't do this to me, Arthur yelled, his voice echoing in the silent boardroom. We just did, Mr. Davies said, pushing a letter across the vast mahogany table. It was the official notice of his indefinite suspension. He informed Arthur he was welcome to call his lawyer, but strongly advised against making a scene. The financial news outlets would have a field day with a video of a star fund manager being frog-marched out by security. Arthur's eyes darted from the letter to the stone-faced board members, then to the imposing guards standing by the door. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear crossed his features. This isn't finished, he stammered. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Possibly, Eleanor replied, with unnerving calm. But this is our firm to protect. Good day, Mr. Sterling. Chloe learned her husband Arthur had been fired from a phone call, not a text. It was her father. It's done. He's out, Marcus said, his voice firm. Chloe sank into a chair, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly. How did you make it happen so fast? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I simply presented the undeniable facts to the right people, he answered. They made a logical business decision. So what is our next move? Chloe asked. For now, we watch, he told her. Arthur is cornered. He's going to panic and reach out to his accomplice for help. We'll be listening to see who picks up the phone, and that will give us our co-conspirator. Regarding the federal case, they're trying to build against you. Your attorney is making good progress. The forensics team confirmed the blueprints were altered after you submitted them, adding that hidden data port to frame you. This proves you weren't the one who authorized the breach. We just need to discover who did. Chloe let out a shaky breath, a sliver of hope piercing through the dread that had clouded her life for weeks. Thank you, Dad, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me yet, he replied. This story is far from over. The next piece of the puzzle was delivered by Olivia. 3 days later, she called Chloe, her voice crackling with excitement. I got a positive ID on the woman Arthur has been seeing, Genevieve Dubois, and what I found is a bombshell. What is it? Chloe asked, her heart pounding. She's not just some side piece. She engineered this entire thing. Olivia explained that Genevieve had been building a file on Arthur for over 2 years, long before she ever approached him. She knew every detail about Chloe's family, especially her father's powerful history. But why? Chloe asked, bewildered. Because this is her business, Olivia stated. She's a high-stakes corporate raider. She uses different identities in different financial centers. I found traces of similar takeover schemes in London and Hong Kong. Her real name is probably lost under layers of digital smoke, but her playbook is unmistakable. Everything started to make a terrifying kind of sense to Chloe. Arthur wasn't the hunter. He was the pawn Genevieve used to get inside the castle walls. But why Sterling Capital? It's successful, but not the biggest player. Olivia's tone turned grim. This was never just about the firm. She targeted Arthur as a direct path to you, and she targeted you to get to your father, Marcus Vance. My father's reputation. It's built on the information he gathered over his career. She wanted to blackmail him. He has access to sealed records and confidential informants that someone like Genevieve would consider a gold mine. A wave of sickness washed over Chloe. She had been fighting a phantom war against the wrong person. Arthur was just an instrument. Genevieve was the real danger. Does my father know? She asked. He's getting the briefing right now, Olivia said, and he is furious. There's one more thing. The profits from the illegal trades The ones that were laundered through crypto accounts with your name attached were ultimately rerouted into a second completely hidden network of accounts. Accounts that belong exclusively to Genevieve. She was cheating her own partner, and my husband Arthur was completely clueless. Her end game was to take the money and disappear, leaving both of us to take the fall and face federal prison. The treachery was sickening. I had already lost my career, my marriage, and my good name, all because of a woman whose existence I hadn't even suspected. So, what was our play? My father, Marcus, had a strategy. We let the wolves devour each other, he said. Then we leak the story of the fight. The plan was as simple as it was brutal. Genevieve had been playing Arthur for years. All we needed to do was reveal the puppeteer's strings. His monumental ego would do the rest. It began with a series of anonymous digital drops, small crumbs of truth delivered to Arthur through encrypted channels he believed were secure. An old contact who happened to see something. A partial screenshot of a secret ledger sent from a burner account. A recovered audio file, cleverly edited, appeared in his secure message box. Every piece of the puzzle painted the same humiliating picture. Genevieve wasn't his partner, she was his handler, and she was getting ready to cut him loose and feed him to the feds to save herself. Arthur, being the raging narcissist he was, completely lost control. He stormed into Genevieve's penthouse, overlooking Lake Michigan, his face a mask of quiet fury. "You've been using me," he snarled, his voice dangerously low. "The entire time, the offshore accounts, you've been siphoning the money. You were setting me up to be the only one who got caught." Genevieve, however, appeared completely unfazed. She had anticipated this contingency. "Darling, you're being hysterical. Whatever little conspiracy you think you found, I promise you, there's a perfectly logical explanation for it." He slid a tablet across her glass desk, the screen casting a cold blue light on her face. "Explain this," Arthur demanded. It was a file from a hidden partition she thought was unhackable. It contained digital communications, financial models, and detailed psychological profiles, a perfectly crafted hostile takeover plan with him as the disposable centerpiece. "These are the strategies you swore were only for defensive purposes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Genevieve calmly picked up the tablet, her manicured fingers drumming on its metallic case. Her expression was a flawless mask of nonchalance, but the rapid blinking of her eyes gave her away. You could almost hear the gears turning in her mind as she searched for an exit strategy. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her tone soft. "Does it matter? You played me for months. Every connection I leveraged, every risk I took for our project. Was it all just to create enough chaos for a hostile takeover? Was any part of our partnership real, or was I just the asset you were planning to liquidate?" Genevieve set the tablet down, her expression softening into something that looked almost like pity. "Oh, Arthur," she sighed, a note of theatrical disappointment in her voice. "You really can't see the larger game, can you? Every single move was for us. The plan was always to use the firm as a springboard, secure our financial independence, and build an empire together, somewhere no one could ever touch us." "Our future?" Arthur laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You were framing my pregnant wife, Chloe, to take the fall for financial crimes. I was creating a necessary diversion to protect our interests," Genevieve corrected him smoothly. "There's a big difference. Your wife's digital signature is on the original architectural plans for the new data center. She's the first person the SEC would investigate. Once the chaos starts, she becomes the primary suspect, and we disappear. And those offshore accounts? That was just our emergency fund," Genevieve explained, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a seductive, hypnotic murmur. "But none of that needs to happen. We can still have everything we planned." Arthur just stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and anger. For a terrifying second, it looked like he might actually fall for it, that his obsession with her would win out over common sense. But it didn't. "I trusted you," he said, his voice flat and empty. "I was willing to risk my unborn child for you. I blew up my entire life for you, and your plan was to strip me of everything and leave me to rot in a cell. Arthur, listen to me." "No," he said firmly, taking a step back toward the door. "It's over. I'm not going down with you." He turned and walked out. For a moment, Genevieve stood frozen, and then her carefully constructed composure shattered, revealing the ice-cold rage that was always hiding just beneath the surface. Arthur went directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. He laid out the whole conspiracy, from the shell companies to Genevieve Dubois' true identity. He masterfully portrayed himself as the victim, a brilliant but naive financier ensnared by a professional corporate predator. The investigators listened, took pages of notes, and immediately started making calls. 24 hours later, a team of FBI agents raided Genevieve's downtown Chicago office to take her into custody. She wasn't there, but they caught her at Arthur's firm, where she was trying to remotely wipe the company's servers. They arrested her in the main trading floor in front of more than 50 employees. The camera flashes from the press were blinding. The story was everywhere within hours. A beautiful, high-powered corporate raider in a designer suit being led away in handcuffs. With my lawyer, Olivia, sitting beside me, I watched the whole thing unfold on the news. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a flicker of hope. "It's actually over, isn't it?" I asked. "She's arrested. Arthur cooperated. They'll be investigating them now, not me." Olivia nodded, but her expression was still guarded. "It's looking very good. The FBI is proceeding with the theory that you were another one of her victims. The digital trail, the altered blueprints, it all points to your innocence. So, I'm in the clear. You're in the clear." I let out a breath I hadn't even known I was holding for the past 6 months. My eyes fell to the framed ultrasound picture of my son, Noah, on the end table. "We did it, little guy," I whispered. "It's finally done." But it wasn't. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Olivia, and her voice was tight with panic. "They dropped every single charge against Genevieve." "What are you saying?" "The SEC filings are gone. The entire data package Liam sent over has been compromised. It's just digital noise now." "But that's on a secure government server. Someone would need top-tier clearance to scrub that data clean," I argued, my voice shaking. "How is that possible?" "I have no clue," Chloe responded. "But the investigation is dead, and Vivienne Dubois is walking away without a scratch. And Claire, there's more." "How can there possibly be more?" "She knows it was you," Chloe said, her tone grim. "She knows you're the one who pushed Liam to report the shell corporations, and she's not going to forget it." I sank onto the sofa, the glimmer of hope I'd felt just an hour ago evaporating into a cold, familiar dread. "So, she's targeting me now." "She's targeting all of us," Chloe corrected. The first move came that same evening. I drove to my father's apartment to figure out what to do next, only to find paramedics wheeling him out on a gurney. His face was a ghastly shade of gray. He was fighting for every breath, one hand clutching his chest. "Dad!" I screamed, running to his side. "What happened?" "It was his insulin," one of the EMTs told me. "His pharmacy received a forged cancellation for his prescription this morning. He's in diabetic shock. We have to go. Are you his daughter?" "Yes, I am." I scrambled into the ambulance and took my father's clammy hand in mine. "Dad, please, hold on." David's eyes fluttered open. His grip was weak, but his gaze was like iron. "Don't you dare stop," he whispered hoarsely. "No matter what, you finish this." Promise me, Claire." "I promise." His eyes closed again. As the paramedics worked frantically around him, I could only sit there, frozen by the terrifying thought of how much more I could possibly lose. David was stabilized after a harrowing few hours, but the doctors warned he'd be in the hospital for weeks. I felt utterly adrift, but it was about to get worse. My phone buzzed. It was Chloe, and I steeled myself for more bad news. "I have to step down as your legal counsel," she said, her voice strained with pain. "What?" "Chloe, no, you can't do that." "Vivian's people dug something up from my past," she said, her voice starting to break. "A sealed case from early in my career. If I don't walk away, they'll leak it and have me disbarred. My career, my family. She'll ruin everything." "Chloe, please," I begged. "You told me you would see this through with me." A long, painful silence hung in the air, broken only by a choked sob on her end. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I wish I had the stomach to fight her. But I don't. I have 2 kids to think about." "I understand," I said, even though a furious part of me didn't understand at all. "Thank you for everything you did." "I hope to God you find a way to beat her," Chloe whispered. And then the call ended. I sat alone in the sterile, impersonal waiting area of the hospital, just another anonymous face among strangers. My father was in critical care, my lawyer and best friend was gone, and my enemy was not only free, but actively hunting me. I had never been so completely and utterly alone. I stared at the beige wall, the silence of the room a physical weight. The only positive thought was that my dad was still alive. The negative was literally every other aspect of my life. Vivian was free, and Liam was no doubt making a deal to protect himself, framing himself as her biggest victim. Every legal avenue we had tried was now a dead end. That's when the messages started. They came from anonymous, encrypted numbers, each one a perfectly crafted, psychological attack. "Did your little architectural history degree make you think you could blueprint my downfall? Your father's blood sugar is such a delicate thing. All your support has vanished. I'm going to take your life apart, piece by piece, and you're just going to have to watch." I deleted every single one without responding. I knew she was goading me, looking for a weakness, a sign of fear. I refused to give her the satisfaction, but in the dead of night, with the quiet hum of hospital machinery in the background, it was hard not to feel the world shrinking around me. Claire felt like she was drowning in despair. What was the use in fighting anymore? Her daughter Lily hadn't even been born, and her life was already a battlefield. Liam and Vivian were untouchable. She felt like a complete and total failure. She took out the most recent ultrasound picture from her wallet, her finger tracing the tiny outline of her daughter's profile. "I've already failed you," she whispered to the picture. A deep, agonizing wave of sorrow washed over her, and for the first time she allowed herself to truly break down and cry. She had been suppressing her fear and grief for what felt like an eternity. A while later, a nurse gently touched her shoulder. "Ms. Thompson," she said quietly, "your father is awake. He's asking for you." Lying in that hospital bed, David looked 10 years older, diminished by the web of tubes and monitors connected to him. But when Claire walked in, his eyes found hers, and they were as sharp and focused as ever. "You look terrible," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. Claire let out a weak laugh. "Look who's talking," she replied. "Fair point," he admitted, motioning to a chair by the bed. "Sit down. Tell me what's happened." Claire laid it all out. She told him about the SEC data being erased, Vivian's horrifying threats, and how every last bit of her resolve had evaporated. David listened intently, his face a neutral mask. When she was done, he asked a single simple question. "So you're just quitting?" "I don't know what else there is to do," she admitted, her voice hollow. "Yes, you do," he shot back. "You're my daughter. You're a brilliant researcher. and you are not going to let some sociopathic venture capitalist win. But she's won, Dad. She took everything. She blew up our first strategy. He corrected her. That's not the same as taking everything. He winced as he tried to sit up straighter. In my old job as a journalist, we had a phrase for this. We called it getting your story killed. Your sources go silent. Your evidence is discredited. Your whole angle is dead. It feels like the end. But for me, that was always the start of a new investigation. He continued. Our first move was too predictable, too by the book. Of course it failed against someone who owns the book. So now, we do it differently. A grim smile I hadn't seen since my childhood played on his lips. Vivian has a history, he said with certainty, with other tech companies, other founders. You need to find them. People like her make enemies, and a ruined business partner never throws away the paperwork. Find the lives she's destroyed, and you'll find the proof she thinks she buried. I told him I wouldn't have the first clue where to look. You start in the public record, he coached. SEC filings, corporate bankruptcy archives, old articles from the Wall Street Journal. Vivian has been at this for a decade. She's left a trail of financial destruction. You just have to learn how to follow it. And what do I do when I find these people? I asked. Then you give them something Vivian never saw coming, David said, a fierce light in his eyes. You give them a second chance, a chance for payback. You build a coalition. A coalition? The idea was overwhelming. Vivian's method is to isolate her victims, he explained. She goes after people without powerful allies or endless legal funds. She knows they're easy to break one by one. But if you all come forward together, he finished, you might just be strong enough to bring her entire empire crashing down. The plan was incredibly dangerous, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it was tangible. It was a way forward. I'll try, I said. He shook his head slightly. No, you'll do it. For yourself and for Lily. Giving up is not an option. I gave him a slow nod. I bent down, kissed his forehead, and promised I would let him get some rest. I had research to do. For the next 3 days, I was immersed in a world of digital business archives. I sifted through mountains of financial reports and forgotten news clippings. My skills as a historian, finally finding a new purpose as I searched for a signature pattern. I looked for startups and families financially ruined by deceptive buyouts, patent theft, and vicious smear campaigns. It began with a picture in an old magazine. Slowly, a pattern emerged. I found a shuttered biotech firm in Boston from 2020. The founder, a brilliant scientist, was accused of falsifying data by his own board before he lost everything. Then I found a failed green energy startup in Austin from 2017 and a family-run software company in Seattle from 2015. The playbook was identical every time. And lurking in the background of old industry gala photos, I saw her, the same woman with different aliases. Victoria Dane, Veronica Stone, Valerie Durand. 3 different names, one single predator. I compiled every piece of data into a new, heavily encrypted file. While most of her victims had disappeared from public life, one name kept surfacing on old, obscure investor message boards. A lone voice trying to warn others. Marcus Thorne. I managed to track him to a small town in Vermont, where he now ran a small financial consulting firm out of his home. It took 3 emails before he finally answered. His reply laced with suspicion. My name is Claire Thompson, I wrote. I think a woman we both have in common is trying to destroy my husband's company. After a full day of tense silence, a short message appeared in my inbox. Victoria. That was the name she was using when she gutted my company and ruined my life. I know, I typed, my hands shaking slightly as I wrote. She's doing it to my family right now, and I need your help. After another long, agonizing pause, Marcus wrote back. I saved everything, every falsified audit, every forged wire transfer. I always knew someone else would come looking for her eventually. Tell me where you are, I replied instantly. I'm booking a flight. For the first time in an eternity, I felt the tiniest spark of hope. Marcus Thorne operated out of a cramped office above a general store. The air inside was thick with the scent of old files and brewing coffee, and drawn blinds fought against the bright morning light. Marcus himself looked much older than his 49 years, his face lined with a permanent, deep-seated exhaustion. You must be Claire, he said, his voice raspy. Please, come in. His office wasn't just a place of business. It was a war room. Bankers' boxes and binders were piled high on every flat surface. For years I've been waiting, David said, his voice a low hum in the noisy coffee shop, waiting for someone to show up who could actually do something with the data I saved. He nodded toward an encrypted laptop. I have everything. Every secret message Marcus sent to Serena, every stolen line of code she had him create. I tracked their digital footprints for 2 years after he destroyed my career. I packaged it all, just waiting for today. He slid a heavy-duty external drive across the table. For someone who can truly hit back. Inside, I could see folders containing damning source code, wiretap transcripts, and clandestine photographs. It was a blueprint of corporate espionage that spanned years. I asked him why he never went to the authorities. I tried, he said, his voice sharp with bitterness. They were either bought, or his powerful board members paid them to look the other way. Marcus is protected by layers of influence. Every time I got close, a key witness would retract their statement, and I would be painted as a bitter, unstable programmer. So, you just quit? My gaze met his. I survived. There is a distinction. I had no money left for lawyers, but I kept all of this, hoping someone with more leverage, more to lose, would come along. I thought of my unborn child and the new life I was building. I have my reasons to fight, I told him. Then take it, he said, pushing the drive into my hands. Use all of it. Make that man answer for what he has done. The scale of Marcus's betrayal was breathtaking. He had systematically gutted at least 3 startups, but this time was going to be different. This time, he had to face me. Anya knew she needed backup, so she called Liam. Her voice was firm when she said, I need your help, Liam. One last time, totally off the books. Liam, an investigative journalist, paused, terrified of the powerful figures in Marcus Thorne's orbit. But she explained this was different. It was an analog operation with no network trail. Then she dropped the bombshell. I found David Chen. David was a myth, a cautionary tale from years ago who had kept everything. Not cloud files that could be deleted, but physical hard drives. He had years of server logs and original source code connecting Marcus to intellectual property theft in 2 different industries. What do you need from me? Liam asked, his voice a near whisper. Anya's plan was audacious. She wanted to build ironclad cases with federal agencies and hand them over all at the same exact time. Marcus had friends at the SEC who made problems disappear before, but he could not stop simultaneous investigations by multiple federal bodies. Liam was speechless, calling the plan utterly insane. But a moment later, he let out a short, respectful laugh. All right, he said. Send me a sample of what you have. The next 2 weeks were an absolute blur. Anya worked 18-hour days. Her mentor, Judge Miller, a retired federal judge, coordinated their legal strategy from his home office using encrypted communications. Liam identified the most tenacious prosecutors in the Department of Justice and the SEC. David provided the crucial technical analysis that connected all the schemes. Piece by piece, they built an unshakable, nationwide case against Marcus Thorne. When the moment arrived, they convened in Judge Miller's home library. Her mentor was out of his sickbed, looking gaunt but determined. Liam stood by the French doors, on edge but ready. David had even flown in from his hideout in Portland. 4 individuals against a corrupt Silicon Valley giant. Anya looked at her small circle and felt a wave of determination. "We are ready," she declared. "Tomorrow, we deliver the evidence to 3 federal agencies at once. It is all on physical media, so Marcus cannot delete it." Liam asked about the board chairman, Marcus's closest ally. "Marcus is already cooperating with the SEC," Anya said. "He is giving them the chairman to try and save his own neck." Judge Miller added that his old contacts at the Justice Department were investigating the compromised regulators who had protected Marcus for so long. His legal shield is gone. A year ago, Anya was just a political consultant expecting her first baby. Now she had lost almost everything, but she had unearthed a resilience she never knew she possessed. She had found allies in the ruins and a purpose for her grief. "Tomorrow," Anya said, her voice as hard as silicon, "we dismantle his entire empire." They all nodded. They were ready. Anya chose a sterile, glass-walled conference room for the final confrontation. Marcus arrived radiating an unnerving confidence, a shark who thought the feeding was already over. "I was surprised you called," Marcus said, with a condescending smile. "I assumed you were prepared to accept the new reality." Anya disregarded the jab. "Actually," she said evenly, "I am here to offer you a choice." Marcus laughed. "A choice? You have nothing. Your connections are gone, and your mentor is an irrelevant old man." Anya slid a tablet across the sleek table. "Project Nightingale," she said softly, "the secret company in Austin." Marcus's smile faltered. "Project Chimera, the Shell Corp in Seattle." The smile evaporated completely. "I have everything," Anya said, her voice like ice. "I found David Chen, the one who kept the physical drives. Marcus tried to recover, claiming old data was worthless." "You are mistaken," Anya replied. "He kept the original server logs and the uncompiled source code, things that cannot be erased." Marcus's face turned ashen. "You are bluffing." Anya simply held up her phone, showing Marcus the news alerts. The Department of Justice had just filed charges, then another alert for the SEC, then the Southern District of New York. "Right now," Anya explained, "federal prosecutors in 3 jurisdictions are announcing indictments against you: wire fraud, conspiracy, and economic espionage. Soon, the Federal Trade Commission will add their own charges. Your powerful friends cannot help you." Marcus's hands began to shake. "Oh, and one other thing," Anya leaned in. "Your CFO has already turned on you. He is trading your secrets for a plea deal. He learned from the master, after all. Self-interest above all else." Marcus's composure finally disintegrated. "I will destroy you," he hissed. Anya stood and placed the key card to their penthouse on the table. "You went after my future. Your greed cost me my son. You obliterated my life." She leaned close to his face. "But you forgot one thing. I used to be an opposition researcher, and I never, ever miss a single detail." Anya walked out without a second glance, leaving Marcus to face his downfall. 24 hours later, Marcus Thorne was arrested at a private airfield, trying to escape the country. The news showed him being led away in cuffs, his tech prodigy facade finally shattered for the entire world to see. From Judge Miller's library, Anya watched the news, surrounded by her small band of allies. The judge looked stronger each day from his leather armchair, while Liam finally seemed calm by the window. On the sofa, David wept silently as the man who had destroyed his life was finally held accountable. David whispered, "It is done." The judge corrected him gently. "Almost. There is still the board." 2 weeks later, the courtroom was tense as Marcus Thorne faced his sentencing. Anya sat in the front row, her expression unreadable as the judge detailed the charges: 15 years for fraud and conspiracy. As guards led a defeated man in an orange jumpsuit away, all his famous arrogance was gone. Anya locked eyes with him. She offered no smile, no hint of victory, just a quiet intensity he could not meet. He would have 15 years to think about how his child died while he was chasing a deal. That was her justice. Once Marcus was sentenced, Judge Miller started his own campaign. His first stop was Henderson Croft's mansion. The former board chairman looked withered when he opened the door, his professional life having evaporated after Anya's lawsuit. He had been forced off every corporate and charity board. "Judge Miller," he said, his voice brittle, "we have nothing to discuss." "On the contrary," the judge replied, walking inside uninvited. "You knew about his schemes. You ignored David Chen's warnings. A chairman's job is to trust his CEO, Robert," Henderson snapped. "A fiduciary's duty is to protect the company. You failed." The judge dropped a file onto a marble table. "This letter to the editor goes out tomorrow. It outlines the board's role in covering up Marcus's crimes." Henderson paled. "You would not dare. It is already sent," he said. "I also made sure the Harvard Business Review will publish a special case study on boards that enable executive malfeasance. Your name is the central example." He looked at him with disgust. "You taught Marcus that ethics were optional. Now you will learn what happens when the truth is mandatory." He left him standing in the wreckage of his career. Henderson sold his home within a month and vanished from public life. His second visit was to Marcus. The judge pulled some strings to arrange a meeting at the federal penitentiary. Across a cold metal table, he faced the broken man his son-in-law had become. "If you are here to lecture," Marcus began weakly. "Let me make this perfectly clear," the judge interrupted, his voice like stone. "Anya's last defense was a whimper. I did not know the deal was that critical." The judge moved closer. Her blood pressure was spiking. "She was calling for you, while the medical team fought to stabilize her, begging for the baby to survive." "I did not know she was in the hospital," Marcus cried. "You did not check your phone." "That is infinitely worse," the judge countered. "You saw the emergency alerts from her doctor. You knew it was life or death, but you were having a celebratory dinner with your new business partner." A shuddering gasp finally escaped Marcus. "Your tech company, your stock portfolio, your empire, it is all worthless now. You have exchanged your freedom for 15 years. The judge stood up to go. "But the one thing you will never be free from is this. Every single night, you will remember her fighting for her life. You will hear the phone you ignored, and you will know you chose a merger over saving your own child." He turned towards the exit while Julian's shattered sobs filled the vast, empty boardroom. "Now you live with it," Robert said, without a backward glance. His next destination was the federal penitentiary up north, where Catherine Sterling was beginning a sentence of 25 years to life, no possibility of parole. She tried to maintain a facade of authority in her stiff prison-issue uniform, a sad shadow of her former power. "You actually believe you've won," she scoffed. "I have the truth." "You have absolutely nothing left," Robert retorted, sliding a tablet across the cold steel table. "Every investor who revered you, every programmer who was indebted to you, they all know what you did. Every escape plan you ever conceived is gone." "There must be another option," she whispered, the last ounce of her defiance finally breaking. "There isn't," Robert stated flatly. "You went after my family because you saw a software designer's daughter, an easy target. It was a catastrophic miscalculation." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, icy whisper. "I spent my life in an industry that taught me how to dismantle empires from the inside out." He walked away, leaving her to the bleak reality of her fate. "Enjoy the next 2.5 decades. I'll personally see to it that they are as hollow as you made my daughter's life. He left her with the unbearable weight of a future devoid of hope, filled only with consequences. A month later, Eleanor was sitting in a quiet clinic overlooking the bay, hearing the words that turned her world on its axis. "Congratulations," the doctor said with a kind, genuine smile. "You're about 3 months pregnant." Eleanor's hand flew to her stomach as pure shock and disbelief washed over her. 3 months. That meant it was from before her entire life was torn apart. Before the data leak was confirmed, yes, the doctor clarified gently. You conceived before any of that came to light. A new life had been growing inside her throughout all the devastation and heartbreak. The timing was unmistakable. It was from the last night she and Julian had been together before she decrypted the file. This child was the sibling of the son she had lost, a fragile, impossible connection to Thomas. The doctor asked softly, "Are you okay? I know this is a tremendous amount to process." Eleanor let out a sound that was caught between a laugh and a sob. "I am. It's just, I didn't think this was possible." "Given the recent trauma," the doctor began, "if you feel you need to review your options." "No," Eleanor said, her voice suddenly strong with a fierce, unwavering certainty. "I want this baby more than anything in the world." The doctor's smile was warm and full of understanding. "In that case, we will provide you with the very best care." She drove directly to her father's Victorian home, her mind a whirlwind of emotion. Robert was on his terrace, tending to his plants, looking more at peace than he had in years. He saw the expression on her face and immediately put down his watering can. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. After she told him, a profound silence settled between them. Then his tired face softened with a tenderness she hadn't seen in a very long time. "A grandchild," he breathed, wrapping her in a powerful, protective embrace. "Eleanor, after everything you've endured, this is an absolute miracle." She buried her face in his shoulder. "I'm going to name her Hope," Eleanor decided, "because that's the one thing Thomas always gave me." 3 months later, she stood at the launch event for the Thomas Foundation, a tech incubator funded by the assets seized from Julian and Catherine. Digital renderings displayed bright, collaborative workspaces and green rooftops where a dilapidated warehouse once stood. Central to the design was a memorial plaque for her son. Eleanor placed a hand on her growing stomach as she looked at his name etched in steel. Robert stood by her side, leaning on a cane but looking more determined than ever. Chloe, her former lead engineer, was there, finally free from Julian's manipulative control. Even Mr. Davies, the forensic accountant whose brilliance had uncovered the corporate conspiracy, had flown in from Denver. They were a small group, united by tragedy and the pursuit of justice. "I'm naming you Hope because your brother was the light you leave behind when the world goes dark," she whispered to the memorial plans. "He would be so incredibly proud of you," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "You never gave up." "I couldn't. I made a promise to him." Chloe put a reassuring arm around her shoulders. "And now you get a new start." Eleanor nodded. "Yes, but this is different. Before, I was building a company to serve someone else's ego." This time, she said, looking at her small, loyal team, "I'm doing this for me, for my son, and for the daughter who's on her way." Long after everyone had gone, Eleanor sat on a bench across the street, watching the demolition crew clear the site. She was alone with her thoughts, which for the first time in over a year were calm. She reflected on the past 12 months, on everything she had lost and all that she had found. They say time heals all wounds, but she knew better. Time just softens the sharpest edges. Healing is a conscious decision you have to make every single day. She stood up, placing a hand over her belly. "I lost my son," she said to the quiet evening. "I lost my company. I lost myself in a world of ambition that was never my own. But from the ruins, I found the woman I was always meant to become. My father taught me justice is about rebalancing the scales, ensuring those who cause harm can never do so again. She glanced at the foundation plans. Julian would be in prison for at least 20 years. Catherine would never be free again. Their power to destroy was finished, but Eleanor's new life was just starting. This time, she said to the rising moon, "I'm building this for myself." As she turned to leave, she whispered one last time, "I love you, Thomas." A light from a distant skyscraper blinked, a tiny spark before it joined the city skyline. Eleanor smiled, held her belly, and walked toward her own future. 4 months later, on a brisk autumn morning, Hope Eleanor Vance was born. She was perfect and healthy, with her mother's dark, intelligent eyes. In the hospital room, Eleanor held her daughter as Robert wept quiet tears of joy, and Chloe snapped pictures for a digital album. "Welcome to the world, Hope," Eleanor whispered. "Your big brother is looking out for you." As the baby settled against her, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace wash over her for the very first time. 1 year later, she stood at the entrance of the Thomas Foundation. It was no longer a construction site, but a bustling hub for ethical tech startups. It was a place of innovation, born from unimaginable pain. The foundation had already funded over 50 young entrepreneurs in its first year. Something truly constructive had grown from something so destructive. Eleanor held Hope on her hip, pointing to the open concept labs and the students coding at their workstations. "That plaque right over there," Eleanor said gently, "that's for your big brother. He was the most creative boy I've ever known." Hope babbled and pointed at a drone demonstration nearby. Eleanor didn't think of Julian or Catherine in their prison cells, but of her father, happily mentoring the students, and of Thomas, remembering his limitless potential and his enormous heart. "You're safe now, my love," she whispered. "You are part of something good, something that's built to last." Just then, a shy young woman approached her. "Are you Eleanor Vance? My son just received his first seed funding from you, and I have no idea how to thank you." Eleanor offered her a warm smile. "Come on inside," she said. "Let me tell you a story about a very special little boy who taught me that creation will always be more powerful than destruction." As she guided the woman into the building, Eleanor finally understood. Grief never truly goes away, but it can be transformed. Pain can become your purpose, and real love never, ever fades. It simply finds a new way to flourish. If this story resonated with you, if Eleanor's journey gave you hope, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and let me know what you would have done in Eleanor's position. And if you're new here, please subscribe to our community so you never miss a story about resilience, justice, and the unbreakable power of a mother's love. Your support is what makes all of this possible.